The blizzard hit Carson City, Nevada, with a fury that surprised even the oldest prospectors who had weathered decades in the high desert mountains. And Beatrice Norton stumbled through the knee-deep snow with frozen tears on her cheeks, her thin shawl offering no protection against the howling wind that seemed determined to strip the life from her bones. She had been walking for hours since Thomas threw her carpetbag into the street and told her he was done with a barren wife who could not give him the son he needed to carry on his name. The shame burned hotter than any fire could have warmed her, knowing the entire boarding house had heard every cruel word he shouted, every accusation he hurled at her like stones meant to break what remained of her spirit. Her feet no longer felt like they belonged to her body. Each step forward became harder than the last, and she could not remember why she was still trying to move at all. The main street of Carson City had disappeared behind her some time ago, replaced by nothing but white emptiness and the dark shapes of pine trees bending under the weight of snow. Thomas had taken everything from her over the past 3 years of their marriage. Every bit of hope and joy she had carried west from Missouri in 1882, when she was just 19 years old and foolish enough to believe a silver miner's promises of a good life in Nevada. Beatrice's knees buckled without warning, and she fell forward into a snowdrift that rose up to meet her like a cold embrace. She tried to push herself up, but her arms would not obey the commands her mind was sending. The snow felt almost soft now, almost comfortable, and she thought perhaps it would not be so terrible to simply close her eyes and let the storm take her wherever it intended. At least the pain would stop. At least the humiliation of being cast aside like worthless trash would finally end. The darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and Beatrice welcomed it. She did not hear the horse approaching through the storm, did not see the tall figure that dismounted and dropped to his knees beside her crumpled form. She did not feel the strong arms that lifted her from the snow as though she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against a chest that radiated warmth through layers of wool and leather. Preston James had been riding back to his ranch when the storm caught him, and he had cursed himself for not leaving town an hour earlier when the clouds first started looking mean. He knew these mountains well enough to read the signs, but he had lingered at the general store talking to old Frank about cattle prices and spring planting, wasting time on conversation when he should have been heading home. The wind was blowing so hard he could barely see his own horse's ears, and he had been following the road more by instinct than sight when something dark against the snow caught his attention. At first he thought it might be a fallen tree branch or perhaps a wounded animal, but as he drew closer his heart seized in his chest. A woman lay face down in the snow, her dark hair spread around her head like spilled ink, her body completely still. Preston threw himself from his saddle and reached her in 3 long strides, his hands already moving to check for signs of life before his mind had fully processed what he was seeing. She was breathing, but just barely. Her skin felt like ice under his fingers when he pressed them to her throat, searching for a pulse. He found it, weak and thready, but there. Preston did not hesitate. He scooped her into his arms and lifted her against his chest, then somehow managed to get back into his saddle while holding her. She was small and light, almost fragile in his grasp, and he could feel how her entire body was shaking with cold even though she was unconscious. The ride to his ranch took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Preston kept talking to the woman even though she could not hear him, telling her to hold on, promising her that she would be all right, anything to fill the terrible silence broken only by the howling wind. His ranch house sat in a small valley protected on 3 sides by rocky outcrops, and he had never been so grateful to see the dark shape of it rising through the snow. He managed to get the door open while still holding her, and the warmth of the house hit him like a physical force. Preston carried her straight to his bedroom and laid her on his bed, then immediately started working to get her out of her wet clothes. Her dress was soaked through and frozen stiff in places, and her shoes were nothing but thin leather that had probably been fashionable once, but were completely unsuited to a Nevada mountain winter. Preston had lived alone since his parents died 5 years ago, and he had never once brought a woman to this house. He tried to be respectful even as he peeled away her wet garments, covering her with quilts as soon as he could, then stoking the fire in the bedroom hearth until flames roared up the chimney. He filled hot water bottles and tucked them around her body, then heated more water on the stove to make tea in case she woke. She did not wake that night. Preston sat in a chair beside the bed and watched her breathe, afraid that if he looked away even for a moment she might stop. Her face was pale as milk, her lips tinged with blue, and he could see purple bruises on her arms that made his jaw clench. Someone had hurt this woman, and recently. The storm raged outside for 2 more days, dumping snow until the drifts reached the windows. Preston tended to the woman constantly, spooning warm broth into her mouth when she was semi-conscious enough to swallow, checking her fingers and toes for frostbite, changing the quilts when they grew damp from her fever sweat. He learned the shape of her face during those days, the delicate arch of her eyebrows and the way her dark lashes lay against her cheeks like tiny fans. On the 3rd morning, her eyes opened. Beatrice stared at the unfamiliar ceiling beams above her head and tried to remember where she was. The last thing she recalled clearly was falling into the snow and feeling grateful that the pain would soon end. But she was warm now, warmer than she had been in months, wrapped in soft quilts that smelled like pine soap and wood smoke. She turned her head slowly and saw a man sleeping in a chair beside the bed. His long legs stretched out in front of him, and his arms crossed over his broad chest. He was handsome in a rugged way that made her think of the cowboys who sometimes came through Carson City driving cattle to market. His hair was dark brown and slightly too long, curling over his collar, and he had several days of stubble shadowing his strong jaw. He looked tired even in sleep, with dark circles under his eyes as though he had not rested properly in some time. Beatrice tried to sit up, but her body protested the movement with sharp pains that made her gasp. The sound woke the man immediately. His eyes snapped open and fixed on her face, and she saw they were a startling shade of blue-gray like storm clouds over the mountains. "You are awake," he said, and his voice was deep and rough from sleep. "Thank God. I was starting to worry you might never open your eyes again." "Where am I?" Beatrice's own voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat dry and painful. "My ranch, about 5 miles north of Carson City. I found you in the snow 3 days ago during the blizzard. You were nearly frozen to death." He stood and poured water from a pitcher into a cup, then helped her sit up enough to drink. His hands were gentle despite their size, supporting her shoulders with a care that made her want to cry. The water tasted like the most wonderful thing she had ever drunk. Beatrice drained the cup and then accepted a second one, feeling the cool liquid soothe her raw throat. "You saved my life. I could not very well leave you there to die." Preston set the empty cup aside and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What were you doing out in that storm? You did not have proper clothing or supplies. Were you lost?" The memory of Thomas and his cruel words came flooding back, and Beatrice felt her eyes fill with tears she did not want to shed in front of this stranger. "My husband put me out. He said he had no use for a wife who could not give him children." She watched Preston's face harden, his jaw clenching in a way that made the muscles jump beneath his stubble. "He threw you out into a blizzard. He threw me out of our rooms at the boarding house. The blizzard came after. I just started walking because I had nowhere else to go." The tears were falling now despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I have no family here, no friends who would take me in. Thomas made sure everyone knew I was defective, that the fault was mine." Preston's hands curled into fists at his sides. "The fault is his for being a sorry excuse for a man. No decent person turns a woman out to die in the snow. I do not care what his reasons are." His anger on her behalf was surprising and strangely comforting. Beatrice wiped at her eyes with the edge of the quilt. "I should not be telling you all this. You are a stranger who was kind enough to save me, and I am burdening you with my troubles. You are not a burden." Preston pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "My name is Preston James, and this is my ranch. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need to recover and figure out what you want to do next. I am Beatrice Norton." She hesitated, then added, "I do not have any money to pay you for your hospitality. Thomas kept all our funds." "I am not asking you for money." Preston ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in a way that should have looked foolish but somehow just made him more appealing. "Look, I live out here alone, and I run about 200 head of cattle with help from my ranch hands when they are needed. I have more space and resources than one person needs. You can stay in the house until you are fully healed, and we can figure things out from there." Beatrice studied his face, looking for signs of ulterior motives or hidden expectations, but all she saw was genuine concern and a kindness that seemed almost foreign after 3 years with Thomas. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know anything about me. I know you nearly died in the snow and that your husband is a bastard who does not deserve to breathe the same air as decent people." Preston's voice was fierce. "That is enough for me. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, especially when they have been treated as poorly as you have." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this unexpected rescue might actually be the beginning of something better rather than just a delay before more suffering found her. "I do not want to be a charity case. If I stay, I should earn my keep somehow. We can talk about that when you are stronger. Right now, you need to rest and eat and let your body heal from what it has been through." Preston stood and moved toward the door. "I will make you some proper breakfast. Are you well enough to eat solid food?" Beatrice's stomach answered with a growl that would have embarrassed her if Preston had not smiled at the sound. "I think so, yes." He left her alone in the bedroom, and Beatrice took the opportunity to really look at her surroundings. The room was simply furnished, but clean and well-maintained, with solid wooden furniture that looked handmade and a beautiful quilt hanging on one wall that must have taken someone hundreds of hours to create. The window showed nothing but white snow piled high against the glass, but she could see mountains in the distance when she craned her neck. Preston returned carrying a tray loaded with scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, and more water. The smell made Beatrice's mouth water and her stomach clench with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a real meal. Thomas had been giving her less and less food over the past few months, saying she did not deserve to eat like a proper wife when she could not fulfill a wife's duties. "Eat slowly," Preston advised as he set the tray across her lap. "Your stomach might not be ready for too much at once." Beatrice tried to heed his advice, but the food was so good she found herself eating faster than she meant to. The eggs were perfectly cooked and seasoned with herbs she could not identify, the bacon was crisp, and the biscuits were fluffy and buttery. She cleaned the entire plate and felt almost drunk with the sensation of being full for the first time in recent memory. Preston watched her eat with an expression of satisfaction, as though feeding her well was somehow a personal victory. When she finished, he took the tray away and brought her more water. "You should rest more. Your body has been through a terrible ordeal and it needs time to recover. I have been resting for 3 days, according to you." But even as she protested, Beatrice felt exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. The effort of sitting up and eating had tired her more than it should have. "Then rest for a few more. There is no rush." Preston moved to the door again, then paused and looked back at her. "Beatrice, I want you to know something. You are safe here. Whatever you have been through, whatever that man did to you, it stops now. No one is going to hurt you while you are under my roof." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Preston. I do not know how I can ever repay you for your kindness. You do not owe me anything. Just get well." He smiled at her, and the expression transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Beatrice lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with thoughts and questions. She had expected to die in the snow, had almost welcomed it after the shame and pain of Thomas's rejection. But fate or luck or perhaps divine intervention had placed Preston James in her path, and now she had been given something she never thought she would have again: hope. Over the following week, Beatrice grew stronger. Preston brought her meals 3 times a day, each one more delicious than the last, and she began to wonder where a bachelor rancher had learned to cook so well. He told her one evening that his mother had insisted he learn before she died, saying no man should be helpless in his own kitchen. "She was a strong woman," Preston said with a fondness that made Beatrice smile. "She ran this ranch right alongside my father and never complained about the hard work. When they both died in an influenza outbreak 5 years ago, I thought about selling the place and moving to California. But I could not do it. They loved this land too much for me to just give it up." "It must be lonely out here by yourself," Beatrice said. She was sitting up in bed now, her strength returning day by day, though Preston still insisted she stay in the bedroom and rest. Preston shrugged. "Sometimes. But I have my work and the cattle keep me busy. My ranch hands come and go depending on the season. Right now it is just me because of the winter, but come spring I will hire on a few men to help with calving and branding. Do you ever go into town for socializing? Not much. I go in when I need supplies or when I have business to conduct, but I am not one for saloons and gambling, if that is what you mean." He gave her a crooked smile. "I am probably boring compared to the men you knew in Missouri." "I did not know many men in Missouri. My father died when I was young and my mother passed when I was 17. I met Thomas at church and he seemed kind at first, respectable." Beatrice looked down at her hands, remembering the girl she had been, so eager to escape the loneliness of being an orphan that she had rushed into marriage without really knowing the man she was marrying. "He changed after we came west. Or maybe he was always that way and I just did not see it." Preston's expression darkened. "Has he tried to come looking for you?" "I do not know. I have not left this room." The thought of Thomas finding her here filled Beatrice with cold dread. What if he comes here? What if he demands that I return to him? "Then I will tell him to get off my land and not come back." Preston's voice was hard as stone. "You are under my protection now, Beatrice. He cannot touch you." She wanted to believe him, but fear was a difficult thing to shake after living with it for so long. "He is my husband legally. He has rights over me. The law says a lot of things, but out here a man's word and his gun count for more than a piece of paper in some courthouse ledger." Preston stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow that had finally stopped falling. "Besides, any man who would throw a woman out to die has forfeited his rights as far as I am concerned." Beatrice studied his back, taking in the broad shoulders and the confident set of his spine. Preston James was unlike any man she had ever known. He was gentle with her but clearly capable of violence if necessary. He cooked and cleaned without complaint, but also ran a successful ranch alone. He had saved her life and asked for nothing in return except that she get well. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "There must be hundreds of people in need between here and California. Why did you choose to help me?" Preston turned from the window and met her eyes. "Because I was riding down that road at that exact moment and I saw you. Because I could not live with myself if I had just ridden past and left you there. Because sometimes life gives you a chance to do something that matters, and you either take it or you regret it forever." He paused, then added more softly, "And because from the moment I saw your face, something in me knew I was meant to find you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to examine too closely. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster in her chest, and she had to look away from the intensity in Preston's eyes. "I should let you rest," Preston said after a moment. "I will bring your supper in a few hours." After he left, Beatrice lay in the bed and tried to sort through the complicated tangle of emotions filling her chest. She was still legally married to Thomas, still wore his ring on her finger, though she had thought more than once about taking it off. She had no right to feel anything for Preston beyond gratitude, and yet she could not deny that something was growing between them, something that felt both dangerous and wonderful at the same time. By the end of her second week at the ranch, Beatrice was well enough to leave the bedroom. Preston had brought her some clothes that had belonged to his mother, and though they were a bit loose on her smaller frame, they were warm and practical. She emerged from the bedroom to find Preston cooking breakfast, and he looked surprised and pleased to see her up and about. "You should have called me if you needed help walking," he said, immediately moving to offer her his arm. "I am fine. A little shaky perhaps, but I need to start moving around more or I will grow weak from lying in bed all the time." Beatrice let him guide her to a chair at the kitchen table and sat down gratefully. Her legs were trembling from the short walk, proving she was not as recovered as she wanted to be. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with copper pots hanging from hooks on the wall and herbs drying in bunches near the window. A large cast iron stove dominated one corner, and Preston moved around it with the ease of long practice. He served her a plate of flapjacks with butter and syrup, along with strong coffee that made her feel more alert with the first sip. "This is wonderful," Beatrice said after swallowing her first bite. "You really are an excellent cook." Preston's ears turned slightly red, and she realized he was blushing at the compliment. "It is just flapjacks, nothing special." "It is special to me. Thomas never cooked a meal in his life. He expected me to do everything even when I was exhausted or ill." She had not meant to bring up her husband again, but the comparison between him and Preston was impossible to ignore. "You do not have to talk about him if you do not want to," Preston said gently. "I can see it pains you. It does, but maybe talking about it will help me let go of it." Beatrice took another sip of coffee, gathering her courage. "I was so happy when Thomas asked me to marry him. I thought I had found someone who would love me and take care of me. But he only wanted a wife who could give him sons to work his mining claims. When a year passed and I did not get pregnant, he started blaming me. He would say terrible things, tell me I was worthless, that I had deceived him by pretending to be a proper woman when I was really broken inside." Preston's hand tightened around his coffee cup, so hard she thought the ceramic might crack. He was wrong. "You are not broken, Beatrice. Some people just do not have children, and that does not make them any less valuable or worthy of love. I know that in my mind, but my heart has a harder time believing it." She looked down at her plate, fighting back the familiar sting of tears. "I wanted children. I wanted to be a mother. But even more than that, I wanted to be loved for who I am, not just for what I could give someone. You deserve that, Preston said firmly. Every person deserves to be loved for themselves. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and then Preston insisted on showing her around the ranch. The snow had melted enough that they could walk outside without struggling through deep drifts, though the air was still cold enough to make Beatrice's breath visible. Preston kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they walked, and she was grateful for the support when her legs grew tired. The ranch was more extensive than she had realized from just seeing the house. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn, a smokehouse, and what Preston called the bunkhouse where his seasonal workers stayed. The cattle were in a large, fenced pasture that stretched for acres, and Beatrice could see dozens of the animals grazing on hay that Preston had spread for them. "They are beautiful," she said, watching the cattle move slowly through the snow. "They are Herefords, good sturdy animals that do well in this climate. I have been building my herd for 5 years now, and this spring I should have close to 250 head with the new calves." Preston's pride in his work was evident in his voice. "It is hard work, but it is honest, and the land provides if you treat it right." "You love it here," Beatrice observed. "I do. This ranch is part of me now. I cannot imagine living anywhere else or doing anything different." He looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "But it can be lonely sometimes, like you said. It would be nice to have someone to share it with." The implication in his words was clear, and Beatrice felt both thrilled and terrified by it. "Preston, I am still married. I cannot just forget that, no matter how much I might want to." "I know. I am not asking you to forget anything or make any promises." He turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. I have felt it since the moment I saw you in the snow, and it has only grown stronger as I have gotten to know you. When you are ready, when you are free, I will be here." Beatrice looked up into his storm cloud eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope. "What if I am truly barren, like Thomas said? What if I can never give you children? Then we will have a life together without children, and it will still be a good life because we will have each other." Preston reached up and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I am not Thomas, Beatrice. I am not marrying you for what you can produce. I want you, all of you, just as you are." She was crying now, but these were different tears than the ones she had shed before. These were tears of relief and wonder, of beginning to believe that maybe she really could have a second chance at happiness. "I want that too, but I do not know how to make it happen. I do not know what I need to do to be free of Thomas." "We will figure it out together," Preston promised. "For now, just focus on getting well and settling in here. The rest will come in time." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Beatrice felt something that had been frozen inside her chest for years beginning to thaw. Over the following weeks, Beatrice grew stronger and began taking on household tasks to earn her keep as she had insisted. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and even helped Preston with some of the ranch work when the weather permitted. They fell into an easy routine that felt natural and right, as though they had been living together for years rather than just a few weeks. Preston was patient and kind, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but making his feelings clear through small gestures and looks. He would touch her hand when they passed dishes at the table, or stand close behind her when showing her how to mend a leather harness, or look at her with such warmth in his eyes that she felt it like a physical touch. Beatrice found herself falling in love with him, and the realization was both frightening and exhilarating. She had thought she loved Thomas once, but this was different. What she felt for Preston was deeper and more real, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than desperation and loneliness. but the shadow of her marriage still hung over them both. Beatrice knew they could not move forward with their lives until that situation was resolved, and she did not know how to begin untangling the legal knot that bound her to a man she despised. The answer came in early March when Preston went into Carson City for supplies and came back with news. He found Beatrice in the kitchen making bread, her hands covered in flour, and the grim expression on his face made her stomach clench with worry. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "I saw your husband in town." Preston set his packages on the table and pulled off his hat. He was at the saloon, drinking and talking loud about how he had gotten rid of his useless wife and was looking for a new one who could give him what he needed. Beatrice's hands started shaking, and she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. "Did he see you? Does he know I am here?" "No, he did not see me, but I asked around a bit discreetly and found out some interesting information." Preston moved closer and took her floury hands in his. "Thomas has been telling everyone that you abandoned him, that you ran off and left him. He is painting himself as the victim and you as the faithless wife." Anger flared hot in Beatrice's chest. "That is a lie. He threw me out." "I know it is a lie, but his version of events might actually help us." Preston's eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "If he is claiming you abandoned him, then he is essentially saying the marriage is over. We could use that to pursue a divorce on grounds of desertion. Can we do that? Is that possible?" Beatrice had never known anyone who had gotten divorced. It was scandalous and difficult and generally frowned upon by society. It will not be easy, and it will cause talk, but yes, it is possible. There is a lawyer in Carson City who handles such things. I already spoke to him briefly, and he said he would be willing to take your case. Preston squeezed her hands gently. "You would have to go into town and give a statement about what happened. You would have to face Thomas, at least in a legal setting." The thought of seeing Thomas again made Beatrice feel sick, but she also felt a spark of determination. She had been given a second chance at life and love, and she was not going to let fear keep her from fighting for it. "I will do it. Whatever needs to be done, I will do it." Preston pulled her into his arms, heedless of the flour that transferred from her dress to his shirt. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known. We will get through this together, I promise." The legal process was every bit as difficult and humiliating as Beatrice had feared. She had to sit in the lawyer's office and recount every terrible thing Thomas had said and done, had to admit in front of strangers that her husband had considered her worthless. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Sullivan, assured her that her testimony was strong and that Thomas's own words to others in town would support her case. Thomas fought the divorce, of course. He showed up at the first hearing full of righteous indignation, claiming that Beatrice was a liar and a whore who had run off with another man. But his story fell apart when multiple witnesses testified that they had seen him throw Beatrice out of their rooms, and that he had been publicly seeking a new wife within days of her disappearance. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s, listened to all the testimony with a neutral expression. When it came time for his ruling, he looked directly at Thomas and said, "Sir, you have disgraced yourself and dishonored the institution of marriage with your treatment of this woman. I am granting the divorce on grounds of cruelty and desertion. You are ordered to pay Mrs. Norton a settlement of $500 for your abuse and abandonment, and you are to have no further contact with her under penalty of law." Thomas's face turned purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, Beatrice was free. She walked out of the courthouse on shaking legs, barely able to believe it was really over. Preston was waiting for her outside, and when he saw her face he knew immediately what had happened. He swept her up in his arms right there on the street, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You are free," he said when he finally set her down. "You are really free." "I am free," Beatrice repeated, and the words felt like magic on her tongue. They returned to the ranch that evening, and for the first time since Preston had found her in the snow, Beatrice felt like she could truly breathe. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for years was finally gone, lifted by a judge's decree and her own courage in fighting for her freedom. Preston made them a special dinner that night, cooking steaks and potatoes and opening a bottle of wine that he said he had been saving for a special occasion. They ate by candlelight at the kitchen table, talking and laughing like they had all the time in the world. "I have something I want to ask you," Preston said when they had finished eating. He looked nervous suddenly, his hands fidgeting with his napkin in a way that was entirely unlike his usual confident demeanor. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, her heart beginning to race. Preston stood and walked around the table, then dropped to one knee beside her chair. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the candlelight and sparkled. "Beatrice Norton, I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I feel like I have known you my whole life. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I cannot imagine spending another day without you by my side. Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and cherish you the way you deserve to be loved for the rest of our lives?" Beatrice's vision blurred with tears, but these were the happiest tears she had ever shed. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made just for her. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. Beatrice kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the embrace, feeling like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it all. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Carson City. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that Preston had bought for her, and he wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. The pastor who performed the ceremony was the same one who had married Beatrice and Thomas, and she could see the surprise and approval in his eyes when he realized how much better this match was than her first. Preston's voice was steady and sure when he said his vows, promising to love and honor and cherish her all the days of his life. When it was Beatrice's turn, she had to pause and take a breath to steady herself before she could speak. "I promise to love you with everything I am, to stand by your side in good times and bad, to be your partner and your friend and your wife for as long as we both shall live." The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and when Preston kissed her, Beatrice felt like her old life finally, truly ended and her new one began. They held a small reception at the hotel, inviting the few friends Preston had in town and the lawyer who had helped with the divorce. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for them, and Beatrice felt welcomed and accepted in a way she never had during her first marriage. When they finally returned to the ranch that evening, Preston carried her over the threshold of the house that was now officially her home. He set her down gently in the kitchen, and they stood there for a moment just looking at each other, both of them wearing slightly silly grins. "I cannot believe you are really my wife," Preston said, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. If it is a dream, then I never want to wake up." Beatrice rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "I love you, Preston James. I love you too, Beatrice James." He said her new name with such satisfaction that she laughed. Their wedding night was everything Beatrice had hoped it would be and nothing like her experiences with Thomas. Preston was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and loved. He kissed every inch of her skin and told her she was beautiful until she actually believed it. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two souls joining as they were always meant to. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Preston's arm around her shoulders and Beatrice's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" Preston asked, his fingers trailing up and down her arm in a soothing pattern. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Beatrice answered honestly. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Preston. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I was unlovable, a home when I was lost. I do not know how I can ever thank you enough. You do not need to thank me. Having you here, being married to you, this is more than I ever dreamed of having." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I was so lonely before you came, even though I did not fully realize it. This house felt empty no matter how much I filled it with work and routine. But now it feels like a real home." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Beatrice slept more soundly than she had in years. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Beatrice threw herself into her new role as Preston's wife and partner, learning everything she could about ranching and cattle management. She had a natural talent for it, and Preston often remarked that she should have been born to ranch life. Spring brought new calves and longer days, and Preston hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. The men, both young cowboys named Jake and Samuel, were respectful and hardworking, and they seemed to genuinely like having Beatrice around. She cooked for them and mended their clothes when needed, and in return they treated her with a courtesy that she found touching. Summer was hot and busy with cattle drives and sales. Preston took Beatrice with him to the larger town of Reno for a cattle auction, and she loved seeing the bustle and energy of the bigger city. They stayed in a nice hotel, and Preston bought her a beautiful blue dress that made his eyes light up when she wore it to dinner. Autumn brought cooler weather and the work of preparing for another winter. Beatrice helped Preston preserve vegetables from their garden and smoke meat for the coming cold months. She had become an expert at managing the household, and she took pride in the way she had turned the ranch house into a true home. Through it all, their love continued to grow deeper and stronger. Preston never took Beatrice for granted, and she made sure he knew every day how much she appreciated and loved him. They laughed together, worked together, and dreamed together about the future. The only shadow that occasionally fell over their happiness was the question of children. Beatrice still had not become pregnant, despite the fact that they had been married for almost a year. She tried not to let it bother her, tried to remember Preston's promise that he loved her regardless. But the old fears and insecurities planted by Thomas sometimes crept back in. One evening in late October, as they were sitting by the fire after dinner, Preston noticed how quiet Beatrice had become. "What is troubling you?" he asked, pulling her closer against his side on the sofa. Beatrice hesitated, not wanting to burden him with her worries, but she had learned that honesty was the foundation of their marriage. "I was just thinking about children again, or the lack of them." Preston was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him choosing his words carefully. "Does it bother you that we have not had a baby yet?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "I know you said it does not matter to you, and I believe you, but I still feel like I am failing somehow, like I am repeating the same failure from my first marriage. Beatrice, look at me." Preston gently turned her face toward his. "You are not failing at anything. We have been married less than a year, and these things take time. Some couples try for years before they have children, and some never do. That does not diminish their love or the value of their marriage. I know that in my head, but my heart sometimes has trouble believing it." "Then let me help your heart understand." Preston took both her hands in his. "I married you because I love you, because I could not imagine my life without you in it. If we have children someday, that will be a wonderful blessing. If we do not, then we will fill our lives with other kinds of joy and purpose. Either way, I will be happy because I have you." Beatrice felt tears prickling at her eyes. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think we found each other exactly when we were supposed to." Preston kissed her forehead. "Everything that happened to you before, as terrible as it was, led you to that road in the snow. And I happened to be riding down that same road at that same moment. Some people might call that coincidence, but I think it was something more. Fate," Beatrice whispered. "Maybe. Or maybe God decided we had both been alone long enough and it was time for us to find each other." Preston smiled at her. "Whatever the reason, I am grateful every single day that I found you." They held each other close as the fire burned low, and Beatrice felt the last of her fears melting away. She had been given a second chance at life and love, and she was not going to waste it worrying about things she could not control. Winter came again, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in white. Beatrice could not help but remember that terrible night a year ago when she had collapsed in a similar storm, certain she was going to die. The contrast between that night and her current life was almost overwhelming. She had gone from having nothing and no one to having a home, a husband who adored her, and a future full of promise. One morning in late December, Beatrice woke feeling strange. Her stomach was unsettled and she felt dizzy when she tried to stand. Preston was immediately concerned, insisting she stay in bed while he brought her tea and toast. "Maybe I ate something that disagreed with me," Beatrice said, though she could not think of what it might have been. The nausea persisted for several days, and she found herself exhausted even though she had not been working particularly hard. It was Jake, the younger of their ranch hands, who innocently asked one morning if Beatrice might be expecting. The question stopped her cold, and she realized with a shock that her monthly courses were late. Very late. She said nothing to Preston until she was sure, counting back the days and watching for other signs. When another week passed, and the nausea continued, particularly in the mornings, Beatrice could no longer deny the possibility. She chose to tell Preston on Christmas morning. They had exchanged small gifts by the fire, and Preston was admiring the new leather-work gloves she had made for him when Beatrice took a deep breath and said, "I have one more gift for you, but it will not arrive until summer." Preston looked confused for a moment, and then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Do you mean what I think you mean?" Beatrice nodded, unable to keep from smiling even though her eyes were filling with tears. "I am fairly certain I am pregnant, Preston. We are going to have a baby." The look of pure joy on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Preston let out a whoop of excitement and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down as though she had suddenly become fragile as glass. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Beatrice, this is the best Christmas gift I have ever received. You are not disappointed that it took so long?" The old insecurity reared its head one last time. "Disappointed? How could I be disappointed? This is perfect timing. Our baby will be born in the summer when the weather is warm and the ranch is thriving." Preston kissed her deeply. "You have made me the happiest man alive." Beatrice felt the last piece of her heart that Thomas had broken finally heal completely. She was not barren. She was not broken or worthless. She was simply a woman who was going to have a baby with a man who truly loved her. The months of her pregnancy were filled with joy and anticipation. Preston became even more protective than usual, insisting that Beatrice rest frequently and not overwork herself. She found his concern endearing even when it became a bit smothering, and she gently reminded him that pregnant women had been managing household work for thousands of years. As spring turned to summer, Beatrice's belly grew round and heavy. Preston would talk to the baby every night, his hand resting on her stomach, telling their child about the ranch and the cattle and all the adventures they would have together. Beatrice would lie there and listen, falling more in love with her husband with each passing day. In late July, when the heat was making Beatrice uncomfortable and restless, her labor began. The midwife from Carson City had been staying at the ranch for the past week in anticipation, and she took charge immediately when the contractions started. Preston was beside himself with worry, pacing the living room while Beatrice labored in their bedroom. She could hear him wearing a path in the floorboards, and between contractions, she had to smile at his anxiety. The tough rancher who had faced down cattle rustlers and mountain lions was completely undone by the thought of his wife in pain. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. Beatrice had moments when she thought she could not continue, when the pain was too much, and she just wanted it to be over. But the midwife was encouraging and patient, and the thought of finally holding her baby gave Beatrice the strength to push through. Just before dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the rafters. The midwife cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Beatrice's arms. She looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened her. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. The midwife opened the bedroom door and called for Preston, who practically ran into the room. When he saw Beatrice holding their son, he froze for a moment as though he could not quite believe what he was seeing. "Come meet your son," Beatrice said softly. Preston approached the bed with reverent steps and looked down at the baby in her arms. His eyes filled with tears, and when he reached out to touch one tiny hand, their son gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Preston said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you." "He has your chin," Beatrice countered, though truthfully the baby just looked like a baby to her. "Do you want to hold him?" Preston accepted the bundle with the care one might use handling the most precious treasure in the world. He sat down on the edge of the bed and just stared at his son, complete wonder on his face. "Hello, little one. I am your father. I have been waiting to meet you." The baby yawned, showing pink gums, and both Beatrice and Preston laughed through their tears. They named him William James, after Preston's father. William thrived from his first day, growing stronger and more alert with each passing week. Preston was a devoted father, getting up with Beatrice for nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint. He would carry William around the ranch, showing him the cattle and the horses and explaining how everything worked as though the infant could understand every word. Beatrice loved watching her husband with their son. She had worried sometimes during her pregnancy about whether Preston would be disappointed if the baby was a boy when he might have wanted a girl, or vice versa. But it was clear that Preston was simply overjoyed to have a healthy child, and the gender did not matter to him in the slightest. As William grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Preston was able to expand his operations, buying more cattle and more land. They hired additional hands to help manage the increased workload, and the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Beatrice found fulfillment not just in motherhood but in her role as Preston's partner. She had a good head for business and often helped him make decisions about buying and selling cattle, managing finances, and planning for the future. They made a formidable team, and their respect and love for each other only grew stronger with time. When William was 3 years old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Preston's mother. Rose had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she was as sweet-tempered as William was energetic. Their family felt complete with 2 children, and Beatrice often reflected on how far she had come from that terrible night in the snow. She had thought her life was over when Thomas cast her out, but really it had just been beginning. Everything she had gone through, all the pain and humiliation and fear, had been necessary to bring her to Preston and the life they had built together. One evening, when William was 7 and Rose was 4, the family sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. William was telling them about a calf he had helped birth that afternoon, his face animated with excitement. Rose was sitting on Preston's lap, playing with the buttons on his shirt. Beatrice sat beside them in her rocking chair, a half-finished quilt across her lap. "Mama, tell us the story again about how Papa found you," William requested. It was his favorite bedtime story, the tale of how his parents had met. Beatrice looked at Preston and smiled. They had agreed to tell their children an age-appropriate version of the truth, one that emphasized the importance of kindness and second chances without dwelling too much on the darker details. "Well," Beatrice began, "it was a very cold winter night, and I was lost in a terrible snowstorm. I had nowhere to go and no one to help me, and I was so cold I thought I might freeze. But your papa was riding home from town, and even though the storm was bad and he should have been hurrying to get out of it, he saw me in the snow and stopped to help." "Because Papa is a hero," Rose chimed in, patting Preston's cheek. "That is right, sweetheart," Preston said, kissing the top of her head. "But your mama is a hero too. She survived something very difficult and she was brave enough to start over and build a new life." "And then you fell in love and got married and had us," William finished, knowing the story by heart. "And we lived happily ever after," Beatrice added, though she knew that phrase was usually reserved for fairy tales. But in their case, it felt appropriate. They really had found their happily ever after, against all odds. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Beatrice felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given a second chance at life when Preston pulled her from the snow, and she had made the most of it. She had found love, built a family, created a home, and discovered a strength within herself she had not known existed. The ranch had become more than just a place to live. It was a testament to what was possible when 2 people committed to loving and supporting each other. Every fence post Preston mended, every quilt Beatrice sewed, every moment they spent teaching their children right from wrong was part of the legacy they were building together. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "Just how blessed we are," Beatrice answered. "How blessed I am to have found you, to have this family, to have this life." Preston reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "The blessing is mutual. You made my house into a home, Beatrice. You brought love and laughter and purpose to every corner of this ranch. I was just existing before you came along. Now I am truly living." William made a face at his parents' display of affection, but Rose sighed happily. "I love it when you are mushy," she declared. They all laughed, and the sound carried across the ranch, mixing with the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through pine trees. It was the sound of a family, whole and happy and complete. Over the years that followed, the James family continued to thrive. William grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose became an accomplished horsewoman and had her father wrapped around her little finger. Preston and Beatrice watched their children grow with pride and joy, knowing they had given them something precious, a stable, loving home where they were valued and cherished. The ranch prospered beyond anything Preston had imagined when he was running it alone. With Beatrice's sharp business sense and his ranching knowledge, they became one of the most successful operations in Nevada. They were able to build a larger house with proper bedrooms for each child and even a parlor where Beatrice could entertain visitors when other ranching families came to call. But despite their success and growing wealth, Preston and Beatrice never forgot where they had come from. They were known throughout the region for their kindness and generosity, often helping neighbors who had fallen on hard times or taking in ranch hands who needed work. Beatrice in particular had a soft spot for anyone who seemed lost or abandoned, and more than one young woman found refuge at the James Ranch when she had nowhere else to turn. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Beatrice back to the spot where he had found her in the snow. They stood together in what was now a peaceful meadow, wildflowers blooming where snow had once piled high enough to bury her. "I think about that night sometimes," Preston said quietly, his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "I think about what might have happened if I had left town 10 minutes earlier or later, if I had taken a different route home, if the storm had hidden you from view. All these tiny moments and decisions that led me to you. I used to wonder if I should hate Thomas for what he did to me," Beatrice said. "But I realized that hating him would only hurt me, not him. And besides, if he had not thrown me out, I never would have found you. In a strange way, his cruelty gave me the greatest gift of my life. I am glad you do not hate him anymore, but I still think he is a sorry excuse for a man." Preston's protective instincts had not faded with time. Beatrice laughed and turned to face her husband, her arms sliding around his neck. "It does not matter what Thomas is or was. What matters is what we have built together. What matters is this life we have created, this family, this love." Preston kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, the way he had kissed her on their wedding day. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Beatrice James," Preston said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Preston James. You saved my life in the snow, but more than that, you showed me what real love looks like. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." They stood together in that meadow for a long time, holding each other and watching the sun move across the sky. They did not need words to communicate the depth of their feelings. After 10 years of marriage, they could speak volumes with just a look or a touch. As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market fluctuations, the normal challenges that came with ranching life. But they faced everything together, united in their commitment to each other and their family. William eventually took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Preston to slow down a bit as he got older. Rose surprised everyone by showing an interest in veterinary medicine, and Preston and Beatrice supported her dreams even though it was unusual for a woman to pursue such a career. They had both learned that society's expectations were not always worth following, and they wanted their children to have the freedom to chase their passions. When William fell in love with a kind young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, Preston and Beatrice welcomed her into the family with open arms. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Beatrice cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his life to the woman he loved. She saw in William's eyes the same devotion and commitment that Preston had always shown her, and she knew they had raised him right. Rose eventually went east to study, much to Preston's dismay and Beatrice's pride. She came back 3 years later with a degree and a quiet young man named Thomas, of all things, who wanted to set up a veterinary practice in Carson City. Preston struggled with the name at first, but he came to love Rose's Thomas, who was nothing like Beatrice's first husband had been. As Preston and Beatrice grew older together, they often sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together. Their hair had turned gray and their faces had acquired the lines that came from a life well lived, but their love remained as strong and vibrant as it had been in the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Taking in a half-frozen stranger and upending your entire life?" Preston looked at her with the same storm cloud eyes that had captivated her so many years ago, though they were softer now with age and contentment. "Not for a single second." "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You turned my lonely existence into a life worth living. You gave me a second chance when I thought my life was over," Beatrice said, reaching for his hand. "You showed me that I was worthy of love and respect. You gave me children and a home and a purpose. Everything good in my life stems from the moment you pulled me from that snow." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching another day come to an end on the ranch that had been their whole world. Around them, they could hear the sounds of family. William and Sarah lived in a house they had built on the ranch property, and their 3 children, Preston and Beatrice's grandchildren, were playing in the yard. Rose and her Thomas visited often, bringing their twins who were fascinated by ranch life, even though they grew up in town. The James family had grown and expanded, branches spreading out from the strong roots that Preston and Beatrice had planted together. Every person who bore the James name or married into it was testament to the power of love and second chances, to the idea that the worst moment of your life might actually be the doorway to something better. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the vast Nevada sky, Preston pulled Beatrice closer against his side. She rested her head on his shoulder, perfectly content, thinking about how a terrible night in the snow had led to a lifetime of happiness. "Thank you for stopping that night," Beatrice whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." "Thank you for surviving," Preston whispered back. "Thank you for being brave enough to start over, for giving me your heart, for building this life with me." They stayed there on the porch long after the sun had set. 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and created something beautiful together. Their love story had begun with near tragedy in a snowstorm, but it had become something extraordinary, a testament to resilience, faith, and the transforming power of genuine love. Years later, when Preston and Beatrice were both gone and their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, everyone agreed that theirs had been a love story for the ages. The ranch they built still stood, passed down through generations, and every person who walked its land knew the story of how it all began, with a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger in the snow, and a woman who was brave enough to accept the second chance life offered her. Their graves sat side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their long, full lives. Between the dates were the words Preston had insisted on years before his death, words that summed up everything they had meant to each other. 2 souls, 1 heart, forever united. And though they were gone, their love lived on in the family they had created, in the ranch they had built, in every act of kindness and second chance that their descendants offered to others. The James family became known for taking in strays, for helping those who had nowhere else to turn, for believing that everyone deserved the kind of second chance that had transformed Beatrice and Preston's lives. On cold winter nights when snow fell on the ranch, the family members who still lived there would sometimes look out at the white-covered land and remember the story of how it all began. They would think about that terrible night when Beatrice collapsed in the snow, certain her life was ending, and how Preston found her at exactly the right moment. They would remember that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually the beginning of something miraculous, if we are brave enough to reach out and take the help that is offered. The ranch thrived for generations, a living monument to the love story that had started it all. And somewhere in the eternal beyond, Preston and Beatrice walked hand in hand through fields of wildflowers, their love transcending death, just as it had transcended every hardship they faced in life. They had found each other when both their lives seemed darkest, and they had created a light together that still shone brightly long after they were gone. Their story became legend in Carson City and beyond, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But those who knew them, who had witnessed their devotion firsthand, knew that no embellishment was needed. The truth of Preston and Beatrice James was more powerful than any fiction could be. They had loved each other completely, faithfully, and eternally, building a legacy that would endure for generations. And it all began with a cowboy who refused to ride past a woman dying in the snow, who chose compassion over convenience, who saw a human being in need and stopped to help. That single decision, made in a moment during a raging blizzard, had changed two lives completely and created ripples that spread outward, touching countless others. In the end, that is what their story was really about. The power of choosing kindness, the miracle of second chances, and the transforming force of love when it is genuine and freely given. Preston had given Beatrice a new life when he pulled her from the snow, and in return, she had given him a reason to truly live. Together they had built something that lasted long after they were gone, proving that true love really can conquer all and that happily ever after is not just a fairy tale ending but a real possibility for those brave enough to fight for it.